Okay, so in our prior video, we talked about the different agency provider types that you have available and what they'll offer. Once you've worked through the sort of agency that you want to be talking to, it's really important to know the platforms that you need managed and where you want to be. But it's a little bit trickier than just the obvious, well, we just go everywhere. You've got to have a few more things in mind. As a starting point, you need to understand what the different platforms are and what they offer you. You've all heard the names: Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, Pinterest, Instagram, and there's countless more. But what do they all do? What do you actually need to be? We often get the question, well, don't I just go on Facebook? Isn't that where everybody is? Or I'm a professional, I only go on LinkedIn. None of this stuff is strictly true. There is no one size fits all. However, you need to have a loose feeling for what the platform can do for you, and then you move into, well, who's going to be there and should I be there? As an example, if we were to talk about Facebook, Facebook's kind of the original, everyone knows all about it, started off being friends connecting with friends. Great, wonderful spot to start, but then businesses started to come in and it was all about brands trying to interact with friends. Great, okay, it evolved from there. But where's the real limitation with Facebook? Well, actually, there kind of isn't a limitation. The limitation is imposed by the platform itself, saying you can see this or you can't see that. It builds up a limitation over time. You get sort of a bubble of what you can see. But what you can do with Facebook is nearly endless. There's 3D photos, you can tour people around your house if you want to, videos, links to websites, blog articles, it's all there. By contrast, if you were to look at perhaps an Instagram, started off merely as a photo sharing and photo editing application, there's not a whole lot you can actually do with Instagram. It's very powerful and lots of people use it. It's almost the proxy for television in a lot of cases. Instagram only gives you images and videos. You can't post links to websites. You can't easily show off a tour of your house if you're a real estate agent. You can't easily do a blog article. These things simply don't fit in Instagram. Very powerful medium, but if you're needing to share technical content, really it might not fit, might be a little bit too difficult. You've got your LinkedIn's, professional network, it's been bought by Microsoft, has a slightly different flavor now perhaps to what it used to. Maybe people are feeling these days like it's moving towards being a Facebook, but you can do a lot with it. It's a spot for professionals. You've got your Twitters. Twitter's slowly dying, but it's all about small, short messages. You can do links in there, you can post videos, you can post pictures, you can get lots of content in there and have it seen by many people, but audience is a challenge. Pinterest, wonderful for images, but again, audience in Australia is a challenge. There really isn't too many of them there. YouTube, not really a social network, it's more a spot for putting your videos up. Even something like a House, for example. It's a very new one, it's an up-and-comer. Is it a social network? Well, actually it kind of is, yes, but it's more of a social network with its own flavor. Great if you're in the building or the home renovation game, because that's where people go for things of that nature. There's so many options around. It's worthwhile taking the time to understand what each of them actually do. Here's the important point. Once you understand what the world looks like on each of those platforms, choose only the ones that are relevant to you. Once upon a time, the theory went that you should just be everywhere. Being everywhere means you can be found much more easily. Wonderful idea, but now there's simply too many. And being simply too many has driven a flooding of content. There's too much on each of these platforms. You get lost. And if you're lost, you're putting a lot of effort into generating content that really nobody's seeing. So you need to make sure that you are very targeted at where you're putting yourself. So choose some that are relevant for you. A lot of people generally these days are starting with the typical three: Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Those are the ones that people are mostly investing time in because they probably give the most return. If you go outside of that, you can do that, lots of options, but you need to make sure you're investing your time wisely. So, we've chosen our platforms. Now the question comes, how many posts do we do? We hear this all the time from people. How many posts should I be doing to be relevant? Often we'll get inquiries where people will say, oh, I only want to do 2 posts per week. Other times people will say, we need to be there all the time, it's 10 posts per week and we've got to flood everyone. It does come down to personal opinion. However, when you do either of those strategies, either the high end or the low end, the metrics will tell you what's working. You will be able to tell over time whether your strategy of flooding or not is actually going to give you any traction. There was once upon a time a strategy called the Coca-Cola method. The Coca-Cola method was simply 2 posts per day. Back in the early days of Facebook, that's all you needed to do. It worked well at that point in time, but over time the algorithms have changed and consumer behavior has changed. Combine that with the sheer flood of content, you've got a different landscape. 2 per day rapidly became irrelevant and people pedaled back to 1. Our recommendation for most of the platforms, say for probably LinkedIn, is 5 to 7 posts per week. That allows you to remain relevant, to be seen by enough of your audience, bearing in mind your audience don't see all of your content, and it doesn't flood people. So you kind of get the best of both worlds. However, if you think that's too much, we would recommend a minimum of 3 posts per week to at least be in the game. If you're below that, the algorithms will cut you out. No one's going to see your stuff anyway. You might as well not do it. So we know which platform and we know how much we're going to post. This is something that people often forget. Where does the content come from? A content source is quite simply where your content comes from, so you can then repurpose it and put it online. It's something that a lot of people will leave off the strategy and forget about when they're going into having their social managed because, hey, doesn't someone do that for me? Well, they can, but it comes at a cost if you particularly do it in a very grandiose fashion. There's 3 tiers of content, starting with the owned content, and that is content that you have created yourself or had created for you. It's your brand name, it's your photography, it's your videography, it's your written word. All of these things are owned by you. No one else can use it, unless of course it's shared, and you can use it for whatever purpose you like. Very, very challenging and difficult to create because of course it has to be created from the ground up. But secondly, it becomes highly valuable. So it's the sort of stuff that you want to utilize. The second tier then is generated content, or what we would call a sort of a hybrid. The generated content uses content that you already have and repurposes it. A really simplistic example of that might be, you might have a long video, maybe it's 15 minutes long, and it's talking about many different things. An agency can take that and slice it into little pieces for you to create content that is maybe a minute long, or maybe it's 30 seconds long, and you've got lots of little snippets that can be used on social media. Maybe it goes on Instagram, maybe it goes on Facebook, that's used over maybe many, many weeks to create a story that is told over your social. That's a cheaper way of doing things, but it certainly creates value for you because it's your own content being repurposed. The last tier is the sourced content. Sourced content quite simply means your agency's gone out and gotten it from somewhere else and made it look like it's yours. A good example of this might be taking a news article, sharing the link, but then putting some commentary on top of that to say, here's what we think about it. Your brand's opinion is cast over that story. Another example would be stock photography. It's a very common one, buying stock photography, putting some text over it, creating a little advert, or maybe watermarking it with your logo in the bottom right-hand corner. It makes it look like it's yours, when in actual fact, it's been created from an external source. Sourced content is perhaps the lowest value because people can generally tell that it's not yours, but it is the easiest to create. It's important for you to understand those tiers when you're talking to an agency, because the agency is going to be thinking about those 3 tiers, thinking how do we apply those within the bounds of what we have presented here, but also within the budget that we have available. Obviously, owned content is very expensive, but it's very powerful. So knowing those segregations will allow you to then say, we know the platforms that we want managed, we know how many posts we need, and here's the content that we have available within our bounds, and here's what we're also willing to create. So now, once you've got those 3 steps together, you have a plan in your own mind of what you need for the platforms that are going to be managed within your social media presence. As always, if you have further questions on this topic or any of the others, please feel free to either email us directly or leave a question in the comments. We will answer as quickly as we possibly can. Our next segment coming up is on social media advertising and what that costs. Look forward to talking to you then.